Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the Get a Grip on Life show. On today's show, I have Kathleen Gage. It's another show about entrepreneurs. But before we get to it, if you're looking to make digital content, if you want to start your own podcast, go to getagripstudios.com. That's right. You don't even need to be in Toronto. You can do your podcast with us from around the world. We have a fully virtual studio, and you can bring all your guests into the virtual studio. So getagripstudios.com. But for right now, we have Kathleen Gage. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Life podcast, Kathleen.
It is great to be here. And I'm just curious how you came up with Get a Grip. I mean, I love that title.
Well, you know what's funny about that, because you're the first person to start my show off with a question for me. So that's good. We're off to a good start. I used to say that a lot I started a lighting show. I'm in the lighting business. And I used to say to people, get a grip, man. Come on. That's not whatever. So a buddy of mine kept telling me that I should write a book. And I thought, I don't want to write a book. Who cares what I think about writing books? I mean, there's so many books out there. And I think a lot of times that's a bit of an ego shot for people to say, I'm an expert. I wrote the book on it. So I didn't really feel like writing a book. And what I really wanted to do was just have conversations with interesting people. And so I went to my wife and I said, I want to start a podcast. And she goes, well, why don't you start one on something you're a subject matter expert on? So I started one on lighting and it blew up. And so then I decided to start one just of general interest. And my buddy's like, you should call your podcast Get a Grip on Lighting, because of, nice. So that's how I got the name Get a Grip on Lighting. Now there's the Get a Grip Studios and there's a Get a Grip on Life show. And pretty soon there's going to be another company called Get a Grip. So I'm an entrepreneur. So
I love it. Yeah. Because the name in itself is so perfect, because I was just talking to a group of clients of mine in a private group I have. And basically I was saying, get a grip. Come on, you guys, quit making excuses, quit procrastinating, get into action. And it's amazing how a lot of times people won't say that to somebody because they're so afraid of hurting their feelings. But the reality is sometimes we have to hurt people's feelings. And that's just the name of the game.
You know what? I think if I were ever a business coach, if somebody said to me, hey, I want you to help me, maybe that's, for someone who's, maybe I have 20 years experience as an entrepreneur. Maybe I could do it. I like to tell my employees what to do, but I'm a little bit reticent to tell people what to do unless they ask me. But if somebody were to ask me what they should do, I would say the first thing you need to know is that all your feelings and emotions, they're just messengers from the universe. So if you have a feeling like anxiety, or you have a feeling of self-doubt, or you have some emotion that's telling you something, you should listen to that emotion. You should listen.
I love that.
You should listen to what it's telling you.
So, yeah. And what's interesting is, I don't know if you're familiar with Mel Robbins. She wrote the book, The 5-Second Rule. And her whole thing is about don't listen to your feelings, because your feelings will try to hold you back. And I think, there's a time and a place where we have to really check in and say, okay, what does that really mean? But not let it stop us. It's like so often we let those feelings prevent us from moving forward and doing what we're here to do. And as an entrepreneur, I've had my business 25 years. People do hire me to tell them what to do. So I love it, because it's like, I used to just give free advice. It's like, now they pay me. But I won't give it unless they really have given me that permission, because at times it's just not appropriate, and free advice often falls on deaf ears.
If you don't charge for something, it has no value by definition.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think people, misunderstand their feelings. I think that's a better, a better way to say it. Like if you're having trouble with an emotion, and I mean, there's people that are depressed. Okay. There's people that have, I'm not a doctor.
Right.
But if you're an entrepreneur and you're anxious about your accounting, then the universe is, or God, or whatever you want to call it, is telling you need to focus on your accounting and get it right. That's what's happening. And if you're nervous about public speaking, the universe is telling you should prepare for your speech. It's not telling you not to do it.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because this group of clients that I'm basically coaching, and I don't like to call myself a coach because I consider myself more of a mentor.
Mm,
I'm not a life coach. It took me long enough to figure out how to do my own life, let alone helping other people do
sure.
theirs. But the whole group is their goal is to get 100 podcast opportunities within a certain period of time.
Mm,
And so I set everything up to where I gave them all the resources and tools they needed. And a few of them are like hitting the ground running. They're getting like really great response rate. They're out there doing their thing, and they're just not letting anything hold them back. Where I have one person who is coming up with everything to distract herself rather than going and looking for opportunities that are
mm.
very specific to her expertise. And she's watching videos, she's reading books, she's reading blog posts. I said, okay, enough is enough. I said, you need to get into action. I said, all you're doing is procrastinating and you're letting fear hold you back. And I said, that fear needs to be turned around and work in your favor. So I completely agree with you.
I want to talk to you, Kathleen, a little bit about the homelessness, because you're American. I take it that I don't know if
am.
you're
I am.
American. So I'm a Canadian, and I know a lot of Americans, and I know a lot of American entrepreneurs. And there's something to Americans that they all require this rags to riches story. Like, you just can't be rich in America. You can't just say, you know what, I made it. And so tell me, answer, like, why, how many people do you see that are successful speakers? I was a, cocaine addict, and like the guy that does My Pillow, I was a crack addict, and now
I didn't know that he was. It does. It makes sense. It makes sense. I think that we get to a point where we're willing to share our story. When I first started my business, I never shared that part of my story, and I actually had a coach who said, you need to bring more of you into the experience and have some differentiation between you and everybody else. And I think that, there are a lot of people that really play on the rags to riches story. And I think whatever our story is the best story. I have a client who actually, her story has nothing to do of going from rags to riches. And she's got a phenomenal story. She actually was her husband's caretaker about 6 years ago when he had a couple of aneurysms first. And her story has to do with staying committed to her marriage, because when there's a spouse that becomes disabled, the divorce rate after about 5 years is between 93 and 95%. It's pretty high. And it's because there's so much pressure. Well, her story has nothing at all to do with rags to riches. It has to do with commitment. And so, there are a lot of us who have that kind of story. And I think there's something to be said for it, in that, okay, what did it take to go from that place of things just didn't work? And for me, it's looking at what was my responsibility in that whole experience, because I used to blame everybody for the way things were. And for me, it's really about, what role did I play in getting there? What role did I play in getting out of there? Did I have people that took me under their wing and helped me to get out of the situation? Yes, I did. And the greatest part of what I believe my story to be is that without a connection to the universe, God, I choose to call my higher power God. And it has nothing to do with religion, but it really has to do with getting to a place of, I can't figure this thing out on my own. And the more I remember that, the more my life works.
So, that's
it's an American thing. Yeah,
it really is. I mean, it's not that Canadians don't do it. It's just that I think Americans need to hear about honest self-appraisal. Like, there's something that message resonates with Americans. Like what you said about, hey, taking responsibility for my life, not blaming anybody else.
Right.
You're responsible. That's like, I think Americans really resonate with that message. And I think a lot of people, when they're in that place of self-pity, when that, my dog died, the country song, right? My dog died, my wife left me, you know,
My truck's not working. I have a
yeah,
flat tire. Well, let's write a song right now. But
yeah.
what and it's so interesting because I think that we can take, and it goes back to what you said about feelings, like what is the feeling we're getting and what is the universe trying to tell us? And it's taking any given experience and saying, okay, how can I make that lesson work in the circumstances that I'm going through today? And for me, what really drives me is looking at how I really did a great job at messing my life up. I mean, I was a master at it. And then I got to a point that I became so good at what I did in my business that when I lived in Utah, I was actually recognized by the governor of the state as the top home-based business of the year in 2002. And during that period, I was getting every award that you could possibly get for speaking, for entrepreneurship, for marketing.
Mm.
And my whole goal was I wanted to be recognized. It was like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And that actually backfired on me. And
So it became an ego trip. It was an ego
Oh my
trip.
God. My ego was so big at one point that I couldn't fit through doors. I mean, I had to turn sideways because my head, seriously. And I believe that when that happens, we can fool ourselves into thinking we have it all figured out. But that's when I believe that life gives us the lessons to really knock us on our knees. And we're literally taken to our knees and to be shown that, no, we don't have it all figured out, that there's always something deeper and there's more meaning to what we're doing. And one of the most profound experiences I had was when I was able to run my business by my mother's bedside. I was her caretaker for 2 years, and it was the 2 years before she passed away. And somehow, some way, my revenues grew during that time while I was by her hospital bedside with a laptop.
You have a lot going on with different businesses, and then your life is, you almost seem like you're very reflective, and you're trying to build some momentum towards a sense of balance and wholeness. But I feel from you like you're still on that journey. Like you're still, like what you're trying to say to me is that, or what you're saying is that you're always learning. You're always going to,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
what would you tell someone right now that's just starting out as an entrepreneur for the first time, whatever age they're like, there's a difference between, see, I actually believe that being an entrepreneur is less risky than being an employee. So if you're good at being an entrepreneur, I think it's way less risky to be an entrepreneur than it is to be an employee. But everyone's so risky to be an entrepreneur. It's so risky.
I think, well, one, as entrepreneurs, we tend to, we live in the solution more than, I would say, somebody working for a company that knows that they can depend on that paycheck, and they live with the illusion that that's always going to be there. And I actually have a really good friend that's a top level executive at a cruise line company, one of the larger cruise lines. And she said, I have so much respect for people like you. And I'm like, well, why? It's like, give me some point of reference. And she said, as an entrepreneur, she goes, you're able to figure things out that people like myself, we don't have to figure that out. And if we ever got laid off, if our job disappeared tomorrow, we would really be stuck. Where entrepreneurs, you're constantly looking for solutions. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I think I agree with what you're saying, that it's less risky to be an entrepreneur, but we can minimize our risks also. There's the emotional risk, the spiritual risk, the just living life risk, that I think it's when we have the mindset of an entrepreneur, we can create something out of nothing.
But isn't that all that risk that people talk about? Isn't that the blessing? Like, isn't that what makes it so great? It's like, so if you were to say this, like what people do is they get a job, whatever, they work there for 10 years, they get a mortgage, they have a family, they're in the house with the white picket fence in the neighborhood, and they take their kids to soccer on Saturday or whatever it is. And they're not really thinking about solutions. They're not really thinking about where the money they make comes from. And I think those challenges, even if your business fails as an entrepreneur, that's just another challenge. Right? That's another.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. There are certain risks that we should encourage ourselves to take, but then there's other risks that we really need to minimize, like the risk of taxes, for example. I know a lot of people that never get their business set up in a way that they have an accountant and they pay their, quarterly taxes. And, in the US, we have all these, and I have to say, I love the healthcare model of Canada. So I've thought of moving to Canada just for your healthcare model.
Do you want to know? Do you want to know? Do you want to know what the difference between Canada is and the United States? There's not a lot of differences.
Well, I know you pay more taxes.
Well, I mean, that depends. There's also tax strategies here too.
So what's the difference?
The difference in the number, if you wanted to say someone, what's the difference, cultural difference between Canadians and Americans? And you can sum it up like this. In Canada, you have the privilege of owning firearms and the right to healthcare. In the United States, you have the privilege of having healthcare and the right to own firearms.
Explain that to me.
So in Canada, I have a possession and acquisition license for restricted firearms, which means that I can buy a handgun. But if I buy that handgun, I have to be registered with the RCMP, who I am, that buys that handgun. And I can only drive it to certain places, and it has to be on a certain route, and it can't be fired anywhere but a range. And then if I buy a hunting rifle, I can buy one and take it from home with me, but I have to have this license, and I can only buy a certain amount of ammunition. And it can't be any type of a long gun. So a long gun, which is a rifle, it can't be any type of rifle designed to kill the human animal. So it has to have multiple purposes other than killing humans. So it can't be any kind of assault rifle. It can't be any kind of military type of rifle. Right, and handguns are very highly restricted. But, if you're sick, everyone has the right to the same level of healthcare. Whether you're the poorest citizen in Canada or whether you're the richest citizen in Canada, you have a right to access that healthcare. In the United States, it's the complete opposite on that issue. Right? So you have the right to own firearms. So anyone's allowed to own a firearm of any kind, whether they're military grade. And in fact, this Second Amendment is not about protection of property. It's about citizens being able to fight the government on the same terms the government can fight them on. So that's what the right to bear arms is about. And then healthcare is a privilege for a certain, when you achieve a certain wealth status.
You are correct.
And so those two arguments diverted from one another in Canada and the United States somewhere, before the Second World War. And then after the Second World War, those two issues accelerated, whereas Americans doubled down on firearm ownership and the right to own, let's just say, guns that are designed to kill one animal, humans.
Right.
And Canadians and the rest of all the Western countries doubled down on removing people's ability to own those kind of firearms and giving everybody equal access to healthcare. So that's the fundamental difference between, I think, not fundamental, but that's one of the major differences of the places where Canadians go in one direction and Americans go in another direction. And
Canadians are so much more polite than we are. I mean, seriously.
That's a myth. That's a myth.
Be rude to me. No. But
Americans are very insulated in the sense, and this is a very broad generalization, but most Americans, they don't know what's happening outside of America, and that's to their detriment too. Actually, America is the whole world, and it's a hard problem to get away from.
I want to share. Yeah, and let me share something that I had a conversation with somebody at a dinner party the other evening, and she said, "Well, America is the richest country in the world." And I said, let's stop right there. I said, that is the biggest load of crock I've heard, because look at our education system, look at our healthcare system, look at how many people actually are in poverty here, look at our homeless situation. Those do not reflect an abundant society. Sure, maybe dollar-wise, wherever we came up with that statement, we're the richest country in the world. But there is so much that we need to work on as a country to take care of our people. And see, that's what I do appreciate about Canada, is that you take care of your people. And, there's more of a community sense than where in our country, and unfortunately it's with the current administration, there's such a separation of them against us and whoever them and us is. I mean, it appalls me how much we've separated as a country rather than figuring out solutions together.
Yeah, it's very dangerous for the world, for the political compromise of the United States to break down the way it has. It's very
Yes,
dangerous for the whole
I
world.
absolutely agree.
Like
I absolutely agree.
political compromise in the United States is completely broken down. And to just
You are
comment on
correct.
to comment on your on the wealth, like wealth being faith, family, friends, and finances. Like there's different ways to be wealthy. A lot of American states, and I don't know if this is exactly true, but there's a lot of American states that spend more on incarceration than they do on education.
Yes, they do.
Like
They
that's a
do.
tragedy.
Rather than,
That is a
yeah,
tragedy.
I agree. I agree. I mean, there's a lot broken with our country, and if you dare to say that, all of a sudden, put in a class of like, oh, you liberals. It's like, wait a minute, it's like let's look at the core of the problem, and I think it's a breakdown of yes, education, a breakdown of the spiritual foundation
Mm.
of people's lives, a breakdown of just so many values that we used to value that have gone by the wayside. And I think it's something that you can't fix in one fell swoop. But I know for me, I have a level of compassion for people who are out on the streets that maybe somebody who hasn't been there doesn't have. But I also have a level of tough love. I was talking to a group of women in a homeless shelter recently, and one was coming up with all the reasons why she ended up there. And I said, no, let's get down to the brass tacks. You're a drunk, and your drinking has gotten you in a lot of trouble. It's ended you up here. And until you take responsibility for that, and somebody who's not been through what I've been through couldn't talk to her that way. But because I've been there, done that, I could talk to her in a way that somebody who is just, they're preaching theory rather than reality. So I think that, we do have to look at what abundance means, what wealth means, and it's so much more than just money. And in my business, I used to teach a lot of six-figure courses. That was like the start of it. Six-figure content creation, six-figure speaking, six-figure writing, because I had been there and done that. I had created that in my business. And then I got to a place where it's like, wait a minute, let's not just focus on the money. And the reason I focused so much on the money at one point was because at one point I had none. And then when all of a sudden I've got lots of money, you're having months
Yeah.
that 50, 60, $70,000, you're just going, oh my God, I've never seen this much money.
Sure.
But I had to realize that it wasn't just about the money, it was what the money could do. And so now when I work with clients, it's really about what's the lifestyle that you want to create. And in that lifestyle, what's the community service you want to get involved with? What's the give back? Because if we don't give back, we end up like we've ended up in the United States, where it's a lot of separation rather than community.
Yeah, there's something themed to this podcast where, maybe the honest self-reflection of people and nation states is key. Honest self-reflection for people and for nation states is a key to being successful. If you can't look at the problem for what it is, like one of the major things is like a country's ego, right? Or a people's egos, right? So this idea of American exceptionalism is a very big problem for America. This idea that we're different than every rest of the world and we don't need to take any lessons from Canada or from anywhere else. Everybody looks at the States and steals all their great ideas. Trust me, we watching you guys, and anything good you guys.
Please don't. You're going to hurt.
Oh no, America. See, America does all sorts of things amazing. You guys do all sorts of things fantastic. Okay, and we copy them. But America, the idea of American exceptionalism, which is you can't say that America is not exceptional. Oh my God, you're anti-American. Like, look, there's lots of great things going on in other countries. There's lots of people, like, you're doing things, you're helping people get out of their egos and look at reflect upon what they're doing. Like that woman in the women's shelter, reflect on what she's doing and say, hey, you're never going to get out of here if you don't claim your life for yourself. If you don't say, this is my life, I'm responsible for where I am, I'm responsible to stand up. It's not everybody else's fault.
Absolutely. And that goes into all areas of our life, whether it be our health, whether it be our finances, whether it be our relationship, so it's really looking at all the areas of our life and saying, what can I personally have an impact on and what do I have no control over whatsoever? And so coming from that place of what can I personally impact, that helps us decide what actions do we need to take to stay in alignment with what we say is true and say with what we say we want. For example, if somebody wants a loving relationship, it starts with they have to be loving to their spouse. And
How
if
about
you
they have
say,
to be loving to themselves first?
oh gosh, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, definitely,
Like so
definitely,
many people, I'll tell you this. I think there's so many people out there that do not engage in self-compassion. Like they cannot say, you know what? I'm really sad about that, actually. Or
right, right,
you know
right,
what? That really hurt my feelings. Or they can't love themselves. And so if they can't love themselves, what are you projecting? What are you projecting towards your spouse or towards a partner? You're projecting those insecurities. You're
true,
projecting that negativity towards a spouse. And it becomes like a type of resentment or something going on between you and your spouse. I don't know. I think that self-love and self-compassion are absolutely key to a
it,
relationship. I'll give you one
what
more.
I get is that you do a lot of self-reflection. I get that you really
For
take a lot
sure.
of personal research. Yeah, it's like, and I mean that's so evident in the questions you're asking, the comments you're making, and yes, it does start with us. And for me, it was like until I was actually the turning point for me when I really got to a point that I either was going to give up drinking or not, and I would
Mm.
end up forever staying on the streets. Somebody told me, they said, you're not a very likable person. You're mean, you're violent, and I was everything that I am today, I would say was, you take the opposite. And that's who I was at one point in my life. And it took somebody having the courage to tell me, you need to make the change. And because a lot of people would tiptoe around it, there's the white elephant in the room with a lot of things we do. And it's really looking at what our motive is as to why we would say something to somebody.
Right.
And bottom line is I want my clients to succeed. And if I see them running all over the place, spending all their time not getting into action, I owe it to them to point that out. But it's also looking at it from a perspective of what is the kindest way to do this without tiptoeing around the issue.
What motivates you? What is it that motivates
Well,
you?
oh, wow. You know what? Something that motivates me is just living life to the fullest because I've been given another chance. And what motivates me is to inspire people to do the best that they can do.
Mm.
There's a number of things that motivate me, and most of it is very, very simple. It used to be that money motivated me. It used to be that recognition motivated me. Now, just to get to the end of the day and say I did my very best. And let's say I go to the grocery store and the clerk's having a bad day, and I've said something that made her day better. I've said something that made
Mm.
her feel validated. That to me motivates me. Inspiring people really to be the best that they can be based on what they define as the best they can be.
How do you define it for you?
Um, I heard this from Lisa Nichols, when my feet and my mouth are going in the same direction. So living in alignment with the things that I say are important. And one is a great example. It's been almost 9 months since I went 100% plant-based in my eating. I do no animal products, no dairy products.
Why
And
is that?
it,
Is that a moral choice for you?
it started out for health reasons. I was getting really bad, and I thought, oh, this can't be happening. So I did some research, and I found that animal products could, by the way we do factory farming, could in fact be causing or aggravating the problem. So I thought, okay, I'll stop because it's going to be better for my health, and I'll give it a week, and we'll see if it clears it up. And within 2 days, my arthritis was 100% better. I've now taken on as part of my mission is to make people aware of how animals are farmed. And if they're farmed humanely, that's one conversation. If they're farmed the way that we do here in the States, it's pretty horrendous. And so it started out for health reasons, and it moved into more of a compassionate way of living.
There's a lot of countries that practice factory farming. And in fact, it's
Yes.
probably a lot worse in other countries that don't have as much land as Canada and the United States do. So it's tough to pass judgment on factory
Right.
farming, and it's actually going to get worse. You know how they say that there's 9.5 billion people in the world in 2050 or something like that? We're going to
Mm-hmm,
peak at
mm-hmm.
9.5 billion. If everyone in all those 9.5 billion people lived like Americans and Canadians do, it would be the equivalent of being 100 billion people in the world.
Whoa. Whoa.
Right? So,
well, you know what I find so interesting is with the weather that we've had lately, the floods and the tornadoes and the hurricanes, and in the Midwest, a lot of our wheat farms got wiped out. I mean, literally overnight, they have been wiped out. And a lot of these farmers are saying we can't do it anymore. We don't have the emotional stamina. We don't have the financial stamina to keep doing it. And so a big part of our production has been wiped out. And I think it's interesting to watch some of what's occurring in the world of how, we may believe something to be true, but Mother Nature has a way of putting the truth right in front of us. Phenomenal book that I've been reading is called The Uninhabitable Earth. I don't know the name of the author, but he did a lot of research. He's got a lot of science backed behind what he's writing about, and it's basically about the climate change and the results of climate change. And when you see what's happening, it's hard to deny it, and yet some people will deny it. And again, I'm not passing judgment.
Here's the question. Here's the question. Would you be willing to give up your lifestyle?
I have been.
No, but I'm not. I mean, that's not you. I mean, you got to look at it's a real paradox between people that want to solve climate change. If you want to solve the climate problem, you have to stop living like Americans and Canadians.
Well, there's like, so much truth to.
But that's a reality.
That's it.
How are you going to do that? People are going to stop heating their houses. People are going to stop.
Well, here's the thing. I think that we each have to make our own decision based on having enough information. Because in many cases, people don't have the information. There's a lot of people that are not aware of what's happening to the environment. I don't know how they couldn't be, but they're choosing not to notice. And there's, you go into our inner cities. That's a whole different conversation about choices people make compared to going to a very affluent area. I mean, it really depends on who you're talking to and what their personal experiences are as to what reality they live with and what choices they're able to make. Because it's real easy for me to sit where I'm sitting and saying, oh, it's great to go plant-based and, eat organic, yada, yada, yada.
That's a privilege of a rich person. That's the privileges of a rich person.
Yes, yes. And yet it has been proven that you can actually lower your food costs if you eat basically from the land. And, so we could go into a whole conversation on that.
Sure.
But I think that it's understanding that not everybody has the same choices as each other, that in our country, there's much more of a separation between wealth and poverty than ever before. More people are moving towards the poverty level. But it's really about if we are given some information, then we're in a position to make different choices. And it's really a matter of, and this is another one I love about Lisa Nichols. She has these great quotes. She said, your convictions and your convenience don't sit in the same room. It's like whatever you say you're convicted to, it's not going to be convenient to move into that conviction. And a lot of people, they say they're committed to a change and they've got a conviction in life, and yet they don't want to be inconvenienced with what it takes to get to that place. With the health situation the way it is, with the amount of obesity going on, a lot of people say, yeah, I want to get in shape, I want to lose weight, I want to be healthy, and yet they're not willing to change their eating habits. So it's not going to happen.
What's interesting you say that about people that are, they're just fat, they're overweight. I hate to say that. I don't want to shame anybody, but Canadians have an obesity problem as well. And it's interesting because, if you're poor and you're in Canada or the United States, the number one health problem you have is not that you don't have food, is that you eat too much. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, that's ridiculous.
But if you dig deeper into that, the food manufacturers have actually created the food so that we would become addicted to it. I mean, they have laboratories where they're in there getting the exact formula of what they call I think it's called the bliss factor. And like the minute something hits our tongue, we get this release of endorphins, and it's almost as good as cocaine, and we're like, okay, I want more. Well, we're never going to get that initial feeling back, but we keep chasing that feeling. So there is the whole addiction to certain types of foods. There's a really good book called Sugar, Salt, Fat, I believe.
Yeah, that's
the
interesting.
name of the book.
I think there's a ton of people in the West. I'm not going to say America. I'm not picking on America because it's the same in Canada.
Oh, pick on America. It's okay.
Okay, fine. I'll pick on America. So we have an issue with, I have 4 children. So there's issues with this Instagram and Facebook. It's a huge problem, and the video games and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And my wife's like, I don't understand why they can't. I said, look, sweetie, the smartest people in the world, not the smartest Americans, the smartest people in the world are sitting in rooms in Silicon Valley, and all they do all day is they try to make this shit as addictive as possible as they can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like with our cell phones, you got a cell phone. If you have it on and it dings, something just got triggered in your brain, and you've got to go see who loves you. It's like, oh my God, the social networks are set up in a way that we're convincing ourselves we're so loved.
The highest paid people in America are people that addict you to devices and to video games.
Boom. To devices, to medications. I mean, this is
look what's going on with that.
Conversation.
Yeah, it's actually gross when you think about it. It's disgusting.
It is, and that's what I love about shows like yours is you can raise the awareness of your listeners by bringing on guests like me that give a different perspective. It's like, okay, let's just at least consider the information. Because it's like years ago when doctors were in tobacco commercials saying, a cigarette will help reduce the stress. Yeah. And look at the long-term impact of that. So, you have to look at what's the motive behind a lot of these companies. It's the greenbacks, no doubt about it. And in many cases, they don't care about the consumer. And so we as consumers, and this is what I love about what's going on with our administration right now, the lay person and the average Joe on the street and Jane on the street, they're starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, maybe I need to get a little more involved. Maybe I need to quit saying, oh, it's somebody else's problem. And each in our own way, we can do something to make the quality of life better. But again, it's a matter of our conviction and our convenience don't reside in the same room. It's going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's going to take money in some cases.
Yeah.
And
I think one of the huge security risks for the world, again, is the degeneration of American political engagement. It's actually not getting better. It's getting worse. Mm-hmm. So people are like, only the most powerful person in the world is the US president, and only 1/3 of Americans vote for him. 1/3. And I mean, in Canada, it's a little bit higher. But it's bad in Canada too. So I'm not picking on Americans here. But the lack of voter engagement in America, people, like, what are you talking about? That's a huge security risk. Like, America is a democracy. It needs to be an engaged democracy with people that care. And then you have to have political compromise. You have to have political compromise.
I learned about the privilege of voting and the right of voting from my mother, who was in occupied Belgium during the war. Mm-hmm. And she came over in 1949 and she went through the whole process of getting her citizenship. And so I am the byproduct of an immigrant. And she was so honored to have gone through that process that she taught me from an early age about the privilege of voting, the privilege of freedoms that we have that she didn't have in her country. I was talking to some young people with the most recent presidential election, and I said, are you going to vote? And they said, nah, it won't do any good anyway, so why bother? And back to their Instagram, So I think that a lot of it is people, until they're directly impacted by something, they don't take an action on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're on our way to a lot of simultaneous crises.
We're imploding. I mean, it's not even that we're on our way. It's happening right here, right now. I mean, we just had another shooting at, I think, Virginia.
Yeah,
Tech,
it's insane. The shootings are
it's crazy. I mean,
it's crazy.
And what's really sad about it is that we go, oh, another shooting. And we've become jaded by it. the first few that happened, it was like, oh, this is awful. What are we going to do about it? And, I have to give it to those young people from the one school that lost, I believe, 17 students, that they went out and they're still out there campaigning. They're still out there trying to bring awareness to the problem. And
I feel like your message is really one of honest self-appraisal. Like for everyone, for states, for people, like look at what's happening to you and change it.
Right.
Like that's what I feel
Take
from you. It's like,
responsibility.
yeah, take your responsibility for your life. I had to, I had to stop drinking. I had to pull myself up, and I was drinking at my problems or whatever the addiction is, and
Right.
I had to stop, and it was difficult to stop, and it took time, and I had to make incremental gains. But I think the message I think you're giving people is to really self-appraise honestly. Do not blame. Take responsibility for your life if you're an adult.
Absolutely. And be willing to take action on the problem. If you see a problem, don't say, well, they have to fix it, because, we hear that all the time. They need to fix it. Who's they? We are they. And so, yes, it is about really looking at the choices that we make and realizing we're never going to be perfect. I mean, it's like we're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall down. And we're never going to hit the target 100% all the time. There will be times we hit the target.
But you
100%.
have to aim.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like when I work with clients, I say, let's look at what you're aiming at rather than just throwing a bunch of crap on the wall.
Sure.
Let's really fine tune it and let's make sure that you're going in the right direction, because there's that old saying about, do I have my ladder on the wrong wall? I'm climbing the ladder, but is it on the wrong wall? So make sure that, you're clear on what you want to create in your life. Yeah.
The ladder's on the wrong wall. Oh, that's great. So, there's so much stuff to talk about. I want to get you back again because I felt like we chopped
I'd love
up
to come back.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. We're going to have Kathleen's social media and her website if you're listening to this out there, mowing your lawn or driving your car, we're going to have Kathleen's, all her website information, links to her books and all that on the website. And I'm going to bring her back again, I promise. So thank you for listening to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. And if you want to create a podcast or do some digital media, go to getagripstudios.com. Thank you for listening.